Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you'd like to find out more about what we do, you can go to officehours.global. Our first hour is spent just discussing media and production. So for virtual production, regular production, all of production. So we'll be discussing that in the first hour. Second hour is something we'd like to spend a little bit more time on. Today, Richard Lavery is going to be here. He's going to talk about a at-home production, 3 venues, all being pulled into one and then streamed out. So Richard's going to talk about that straight out of Belfast. So it's pretty exciting. Tomorrow we're going to do ruthless reviews for audio. We did that last week for video. As we get ready for Office Hours 2.0, we continue to tweak and tighten all the bolts, and so we'll be doing that on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we are going to be talking about SPX-GC. This is a graphics, HTML5 graphics system based on Casper CG, and so we're going to have Tuomo Kulama. Sorry if I talked to him yesterday, and so we're excited about having him come on and talk about what this means, SPX GC. Thursday we're going to have Keynote. We're going to talk about Keynote. There's been a lot of updates last week, and we talked about it a little bit, and then people got really excited about it, and so we're going to talk about more what's there, what's missing in the new Apple Keynote. A lot of it has to do with live video that you can actually insert as objects into Apple Keynote. Friday, we're going to talk about LUTs. Charles Klein is going to talk about how we've been moving into correcting our cameras and matching our cameras with LUTs inside of Resolve. And so he's going to talk about how he approaches that. It's pretty cool. And then on Saturday is back to the long day. We have education. Of course, we don't stream that. That starts at 8 o'clock, and it's gotten to be a really great conversation. So if you're an educator, I'd highly recommend checking it out. At noon, we're Todd Reynolds. We're going to go to Todd Reynolds. We take over his space and start streaming streaming some music from his space at noon. So stay tuned for that. And we may have something at 10 a.m. We're working out some other details. So that's what we have coming up. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Douglas Carmichael, often a questioner, with what would you think of a second hour with Tlaloc on lighting programming, ETC, EOS, and Grandma 2 or 3, etc.?
Yeah, I think that would be great. so I think let's talk to Tlaloc about that. Next question.
Johnny Estias out of Manila is up with the next one, and Johnny asks, I just purchased a Hyperdeck Studio HD Plus, thanks DVE Store, but unfortunately I'm out of inputs on my ATEM Mini Extreme and HDMI Matrix. I know there's a million ways to solve this, but if you were me, how would you add more inputs to my setup?
Go ahead, Richard.
If it was me, I would be considering a larger switcher. To have more inputs. As simple as that. I know we can loop different items together to create more inputs, but I would probably be looking at a larger switcher and probably a video router. I know whenever we start adding a video router to our system, it was a game changer, overnight game changer.
Yeah. Jason?
Richard pretty much nailed it. That's about as far as you're going to go if if 8 inputs aren't enough.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just to add to what Richard mentioned, if you do end up, like, say, feeding an ATEM Mini into your ATEM Mini Extreme, try to use the inputs that don't require a separate audio path into the first ATEM Mini, so that you don't have to deal with a more complex path of sync.
Yeah, sync will become more complicated if you don't put everything through that. So if you wanted to add inputs, you may want to, we've talked about it, we just haven't actually done it, of having potentially 7 or 8 extremes all feeding into one extreme and then tying those all in with companions so that you'd have a lot of inputs. But we haven't actually gone down that path. So that would be one way to do that. I would probably add more, push everything through another switcher. So if you're going to add an extreme, I would add 1 or 2 extremes and then run all the inputs through those and then feed them up into there and then run graphics and other things, as Mickey said, that don't necessarily have synced audio through that, so that your delays would be similar. It does sound like you're outgrowing what the extreme was designed for, and I will echo the other inputs of it's time to move to a 40x40 router and a Constellation, or at least a 2ME. I probably wouldn't buy any SDI based switchers right now. So I think I'd probably wait. I'd probably wait until October, a little later in October. NAB was scheduled for middle of October, and that's usually when a lot of things drop. So I'd probably wait at least until the end of the month before I did any kind of major upgrade in video equipment across the board at the moment. Next question.
Johnny Estias is back with another highly rated question, and this time he says, I've heard here in office hours and experienced myself the ATEM Mini is very contrasty, in quotes, and crushes the blacks when used as a webcam via USB. Do the web presenters HD 4K suffer from the same problem?
Go ahead, Jason.
No, they don't. The web presenter supports full 10-bit audio, including HDR. So I don't see why it would. It's just going to crush independently. But yeah, by itself, no, not. And
you're breaking up a little bit, Jason. I'm not sure exactly why.
I'm going to reset soon.
Okay.
Back is getting weird.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, what Jason said, it's cleaner with the web presenter. I add some contrast to mine, or sometimes reduce it. I find that it's an issue with Zoom. When I use the ATEM Mini as an input to QuickTime, I don't experience the punchy nature that people are talking about. So that's an interesting, that's just my observation. I don't see it changing anything when it's going to QuickTime as an input, only when it goes into Zoom. Next question.
Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Aeronald, Germany says, with the new Keynote live video feature, it would be nice to have more than one video input. What would be the setup to have 4 video inputs on a MacMini M1?
Go ahead, Michael. Are you there, Michael? Oh, go ahead. You're muted, Michael. You're muted in the software.
So sorry, not me.
No worries. Next question. I'm sorry, Chris. I'm sorry. We'll jump to Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. It has been my experience that virtual cameras don't work in the live video. So like I can't use OBS. I can't use, I don't even think you can use an ATEM, but it isn't.
You can.
The
tested
ATEM
that
does
already.
show up?
Yeah, the ATEM shows up just fine into the input. The 3G input doesn't work. So the 3G mini recorder does not show up as a valid input, but the ATEM does show up as a valid input. And I haven't gotten around to testing the web presenters yet, but I'm going to guess that they will because they show up as webcams. Go ahead, Noah.
I've also had problems with the 3G recorders. I haven't tested Keynote specifically, but deck links and external enclosures would be the way to go. I have also a Sonnet X-Mac server, whatever they're called, which is like an $800 device. I think it's overpriced and not worth it. I have 2 of them. I would just get an enclosure instead.
Yeah, if you want to do SDI inputs, I think you could do that. I think also if you used a like an OWC type hub, you might be able to get away with enough bandwidth to have some 920s or a couple different webcams connected to it. You probably they probably wouldn't take up too much bandwidth to pull those in. You could also use some of the older web. If you're only looking for 720, you can use some of the older web presenters, and they probably wouldn't take up too much bandwidth on the bus. I think that's the thing that you have to be careful of as you start to add them to one bus there. Yeah, I've been looking at the potential of using, the Duo cards, which will have up to four inputs on them to come in and have them show up there. But I haven't tested the cards yet. We're going to try to test that this week before Thursday when we actually talk about this in detail. In general, to what Chris was pointing to, I think that what we'll talk about on Thursday is I think what's missing is the support for virtual cameras, both in and out. Like the question is also, how do you send Keynote to Zoom or something else? And right now, there's not a great way to do that doesn't require extra hardware. So I think that I know of. So that's what we'll kind of start to play with. Next question.
Comes to us from George Sita in Webster's Groves, Missouri. And he says, setting up a Stream Deck 15 with a set of main buttons for common apps plus buttons to swap to other configurations for specific uses. And he's interested in the difference between using multiple profiles versus go-to page or folders.
Go ahead, Ari.
It is possible to go to great depths with folders, etc. Personally, I use profiles and the new pages function, at least it's there in the Excel, typically for each production. And I use them all, but what I will not do is switch during production, and I prefer to have multiple surfaces, so I have an XL and a 15. So it's possible. I personally don't use it in production, just as a preparation for.
Go ahead, Craig.
I use nested folders when I set up different pages on mine, but I'm quickly finding that there might need to be some more options. So I like the idea of doing a specific, a specific, I've just lost the word, profile for different different events that I do.
And Craig, you don't sound like you're coming in from your mic. Did we establish that earlier?
I wonder if something's got knocked out here. I'll check through stuff.
It's okay, great. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California is up next. And he says, last week you talked about generalist versus specialist. I found out the quote we used was originally supposed to be a compliment. The complete quote reads, "A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oft times better than a master of one."
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, two quick thoughts. A, if you've never read Wisdom of Crowds, it's a pretty interesting read about how if you've got one specialist or a group of amateurs, the group of amateurs will often get closer than one specialist. But in terms of what goes on here, I always try and contrast the difference between a professional and an enthusiastic amateur. And while enthusiastic amateurs probably don't know the right answer and find it by eliminating everything else, a professional will get you there faster.
Good, Sky.
Specifically, what I was bringing that up last week was because in Los Angeles, I was able to specialize into a niche into an industry and make a living. So working backwards from the needs, if you are wanting to make a living, you will need to figure out who's going to pay you to do what. And so outside of Los Angeles, you often have to be more of a generalist in audio, video, because there's not the talent pool, but there's also hasn't been traditionally as much need as the manufacturing of product, i.e. content in Los Angeles.
I think also it depends on whether you're trying to get a job or trying to do a job. If you're trying to do the job, you often need to know a lot of things. I mean between 3 a.m. and right now, I did a voiceover, I was in Logic, I was in Motion, I was in Resolve. I jumped into Cinema 4D for a second, so that was my morning this morning, while I was working on something before we got here. So, the fact that I know all those things means I can sit down, and I'm kind of the ultimate generalist. For 30 years, I've just been generalizing. I've been a generalist. I just keep bouncing from one thing to the other. And what I think is interesting about it is that I come back around things that I learned. So I did a ton of 3D streaming or 3D production, stereo production, and that seemed to go away, but it didn't, because as soon as we came back to VR, oh right, we need to understand how stereo works, and I did a bunch of 360, and that seemed to go away, but it didn't, because it's coming back with VR and everything else, and so a lot of those things that you think are generalist or dead ends end up being a little knowledge base that you have sitting there waiting for you to. As the technologies come back around. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say it depends on supply and demand, I think, a little bit, because there are more generalists out there than there are specialists. And if you need high-level information in a particular niche subject, looking for the specialist in that subject will get you a deeper breadth of understanding than looking for a generalist.
It can be. What I really like are generalists who have specific skills that stand out among those. So, if you look at someone like Mickey has a ton of different knowledge about video and other things, but he also knows a lot about audio. It's nice because it gives you an overlap between everybody else so that you can have an intelligent conversation with a lot of people. And, but you have a specialty that you can really drive forward. And so I think that finding a way to generalize to some degree so that you have overlap and you have a common thought process, but then having something that you're really, really good at. I'm not really good at anything special. So they're all equal in my head. But I like surrounding myself with people who have better specialties. Next question.
Noah Sargent has an interesting one here from Fullerton, California. What's the human eye's rough equivalent of dynamic range, pixel density, and so forth, if it were a sensor?
Go ahead, John.
This is an interesting question, Noah. My dad and brother are both radiologists, and then in their career, they have switched from reading film on a light board to using monitors. In my dad's research, he told me that the eye can differentiate in between about 4 to 8K, and that range is where the eye cannot resolve the resolution any higher. There's tons of variables involved in that, But the eyes are very poor bandpass filters from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometers. I want to see infrared and ultraviolet.
Yeah, I think that what I've heard is differing opinions somewhere between 18 and 22 stops is the human eye. I mean, that's what, in conversations that I've been in, that's usually depending on who you're talking to, that's what you get. Next question.
Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman, up next from Astoria, New York, with when the after-hours office hour crew helps you figure out something that helps so much, what's the best way to say thank you?
Craig? Craig's.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I was trying to fix this microphone. My first thought on that would be that to continue to contribute back to the group, to participate and like not only acknowledge it, but to contribute back to the group and share what you've learned.
Yep. Ken?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Say thanks in the moment, give credit where it's due, and pass it on. Take what you know and pass it on to someone else. Remember, this is not your competition you're looking at. This is your team.
Stuart?
All of the above, plus send Tim Tams.
Ari?
What they all said, play it forward.
Yep. Sky?
I totally agree with all that's been said, and also giving credit to Tlaloc, you for helping me workshop the concept of going into the experience was, what is the joy that you expect to participation with this event to get out of this event? So you've negotiated that, but Tlaloc, you have been a great gift to me. And the true success of a story is if somebody else tells your story. So that's kind of you're paying it forward, and you have encouraged me to continue. So thank you, sir.
Liberty?
And I'd say, depending on who it is, also going into after hours at an uncommon time and helping someone new, because that's always, helping to build the community overall.
There are millions of people doing what we do here. There's a tiny percentage of us here doing it together. So really what's important is that we constantly are helping each other move forward. The real advantage is when you put it out there and you train other people to do what you're doing, it's like planting a seed that when you come back, it's going to be a tree. If you hold on to it, it'll just be a dead seed eventually. So your knowledge, your skill set is far less important than your connection to the rest of the community and the fact that you're going to keep building. Because in my lifetime, I've changed from one technology to the other. What I need is a very rich resource to continue to learn and to continue to move forward. And so I think that to what everybody else said is investing. I wouldn't even call it paying it forward. I would call it reinvesting that dividend. The dividend that you got, you reinvest it back into the group so that it will, generate more dividends down the road. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada, here on the panel, says, fresh in the email this morning from Audinate is a Dante Application Library integrating Dante directly into apps. What are the thoughts of the group? Could this be what we've hoped VIA should have been?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I just don't know if anybody's seen this yet. It looks interesting. It looks sort of like a combination of what VIA might have wanted to be and what DVS sort of was. Just being able to target things directly. So,
yeah, I'm curious what Mickey thinks. You have any opinion?
I haven't seen it at all yet, but I like being able to just hard patch certain sources to specific outputs as opposed to, there's a volume slider there. No, I want to control it on my own on a board. But that's just how I work.
Next question.
Noah Sargent's up next again from Fullerton, California. He said, what industry trick still blows your mind?
Go ahead, Sky.
I'm going to vote up TED.org. The whole concept of communicating outside of a conference, an idea, and also the homogenization of technology, entertainment, and design. So the use of this medium as a way of reaching the heart to change the mind. I know that's not a technical silver bullet, but it's a pretty darn good shot.
I don't know if it blows my mind, but for 30 years, I've been fascinated by the use of music, walk-in music to control audiences. So most people probably don't know this, but what we do is we play the music at a certain level, and then you start to increase that volume until so you push the volume up slowly until right before the event starts, and then depending on who the producer is, between 2 and 5 minutes before, you'll play right into the next thing, but what you're doing is you're making it almost impossible to talk. Like the music's getting louder and louder and louder. You're building up energy and making it almost impossible for people to talk amongst themselves so that they're all focused on what you're doing. Now, if there's a lot of people standing around, if you're doing a seminar, you just cut the music 2 minutes out and everyone will sit down. Like literally, everyone will go, oh, it's time for me to sit. Like literally, and they don't know, you're like boiling a frog. Like they don't know it's happening while it's happening because you're just slowly moving that volume up. And then you just literally cut the music and everyone will sit down, and it's the most amazing thing to watch. And I still find it very fascinating when I'm in a seminar, and because I used to do it. When I see someone do it, I'm always amused because it's funny to watch everyone just literally lower brain. They just go and sit down, like they're ready to start the show. And anyway, I just find that to be a funny human trick. Anyway, next question.
Sky Gleason, who was just addressing that last question, wonders how Doug's tennis show went.
Doug?
It went very, very well. 1F Jeff was extremely happy with our production. And it was an incredible thing. And if you missed my conversation yesterday, I was running replay remotely from Indianapolis. The actual replay machine was in San Diego. Our feed was being sent to London, where the two commentators were. They were adding graphics on top of our feed. That feed was then sent back to Bristol, where ESPN lives, and then they were sending it to ESPN3. Also, the tennis channel picked up our feed, as well as 100 other plus networks around the world. And there's a lot of business and a lot of money in betting over in Europe. And so that's where the big money is. And it was crazy that, we had another camera operator in Louisiana. Lana, my wife, was in another room running another camera. And it's just the technology, like that previous question, just it blows me away that we can do this stuff without even leaving our houses. But yeah, the show went very, very well.
That's awesome. Next question.
Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida is up next. And he says, sorry, I was not clear yesterday with my video sync question. With one of my 3 laptops, the USB webcam video signal is glitchy. It is not random. I have changed every cable and every port out of my computer. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Jason.
So as a rule, anything that connects to the north bridge is something that goes directly into the CPU. Anything that connects to the south bridge is something that comes from the outside going in. In this case, I'm pretty sure your USB bus is saturated. That's my best guess. Hopefully I'm not breaking up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, you've changed a lot of things. To Jason's point, what I'd probably do is unplug everything and just plug that one thing into it and see if it's problematic. At that point, and I guess the question is it the webcam signal from the same webcam, or are you switching webcams out to see whether, have you switched that out as well? And that's what I'd want to see is, are you using a different webcam, and is everything unplugged from the computer? So we'll continue this, and you might want to bring it into after hours so we'd spend a little more time hacking through it. This is the perfect kind of question where we start unplugging and plugging stuff in after hours and trying to figure it out. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland asks, is it worth trying to fight Zoom's noise canceling algorithm for a band in a community meeting? And if so, how? Or should we just stick to voice only?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I think this is a continuation of a question that came up yesterday. You can easily disable Zoom's noise suppression system by enabling original sound. And since you're doing music, I would also recommend turning on high fidelity music mode. All of these settings can be seen in Zoom's audio settings.
Next question.
Danny Lee in Malaysia is up next.
Danny Law, I think.
Oh, Danny Law, I'm sorry. I was trying to get to the button. Danny Law in Malaysia says, the colors from photos taken from iPhones or iPads seems to look great on any iOS devices or iMacs. Is there a way to tweak other LED monitors or LCD projectors such that these medias look good as well?
Go, Jason.
Apple is using an expanded color palette, and you know, any modern iOS version is going to have an incredibly, these are some of the most accurate, like when I'm showing a video, I go to these, which sounds crazy because I've got really good monitors, but they are so incredibly accurate. You kind of can't help but kind of be awestruck. To answer your question, Spider X Elite will do a great job of calibrating your monitor, and but it can't show things that your monitor is incapable of displaying. So if you don't have an expanded color bit depth, then it's just not going to come through.
Mitchell?
What Jason just said, gamma is an issue that always comes up when you produce something and you use a reference monitor. There's no guarantee that it's going to be played back with a properly calibrated TV set or video monitor and a railroad train station. It's going to be all over the place. So it's best to stay in one particular area. And I agree. I use Apple product. I like to reference to Apple and just let the chips fall from there.
Yep. This is what you're probably referring to, though, is probably more than just color accuracy. It is the fact that the cameras are shooting in HDR and the displays are showing it back to you in HDR. So this is what you're seeing most likely is the difference between standard dynamic range, which is 100 nits, typically 0 to 100 nits, and HDR, which can be up to 10,000 nits, but typically it's running to 1,000 nits or 1,600 nits or 2,000 nits, or it's kind of where that range goes. Some of your smaller HDR monitors might be 400 or 600 nits, but that's still a lot more than the 100 nits that you see in the standard dynamic range. And so when you're looking at it at a projector, it's very hard for it to do. I mean, very hard for a cost-effective projector to do true high dynamic range. So it's just not what it's built for. And then when you're looking at LCDs, most of them are SDR as well, standard dynamic range. Where you get into LEDs, OLEDs, some LCDs will do it, but you have to see that on the front that it will support. And I think if you're doing it out of an Apple device, it really should support, Vision, Dolby Vision, but it can also be HLG or HDR10. Those are all going to do something where they're going. You want to look at the number of nits. I don't really consider anything under 1,000 nits really HDR. It's kind of cute. So if you see something that's going to rate over 1,000 nits, you're going to find that those images are going to look a lot closer to what you're seeing on your screens. I believe that the new iPads are, I think, running at 1,600 nits, as are some of the other displays. And then the other thing that Apple does really well, if you hand it to it, is even if you don't have a monitor that does that much, it tone maps it very nicely between, it takes an HDR image and tone maps it, which is remapping all of those highlights and shadows back as accurately as it can into a smaller gamut. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California is up next with any online acting workshops you can recommend.
I don't know any. It would be fun. We're talking about doing online acting altogether. We've been threatening to do it over Zoom. We just haven't gotten to it yet, but I don't know any. Go ahead, Sky.
Sorry, I had my hand up and then it didn't. Anyway, I'm taking a online class with stand-up comics. And so it's a writer's workshop. So Noah, they are actually based down there, and the guy that's doing it is the front man for a lot of television, Bob Lee. So I will connect you if you're interested.
Next question.
Stuart F. in Melbourne, Australia, here on the panel today. Right after Office Hours finishes, John Barker is launching the second point Office Hours version of Here to Record graphics. Anyone else eagerly looking forward to see what all the teased features are?
I'm super excited. I'm definitely going to tune in. So that's right after this show. John, if you're listening, you should tell me about that earlier. I would have put that in the email. So anyway, I would have told people about it. But I'm looking forward to that. Go ahead, Stuart.
The link is to the currently waiting reminder for the stream. And yes, it starts literally as we finish here.
No, it starts. It's not. It's starting. So that's the link to watch it, to watch the launch of the new one. He's not coming to After Hours. He's doing something on YouTube, and then we'll bring him on soon to talk about it. So we'll work on that. All right. Next question.
Next one comes from David Brady in New York. And David says, looking for an audio capture device for a Samsung Tab A. The only port into the device is a micro USB. Are there any known interfaces that will work for this?
Good, Mickey.
I'm not entirely sure about that specific device because support on Android devices have been sort of hit or miss. But most of the time, a 2x2 class compliant audio interface will work as long as it is powered externally and also hooked up to um, the mobile device via a USB on the go adapter.
The and I am trying to come up with it as fast as I can, but it is the MV. Is it an MV55? No, there's an MV51, which is a microphone, but there's another Shure that actually comes with a micro USB connection, and it's a USB one, and it's sitting over on. Oh, it's right here. Hold on. For some reason, it's right here. This is the. Sorry, I haven't used it in a long time, but I was using it recently. Maybe it's MVI. The MVI. So this is. This does a micro USB connection, or it will do it, and it's XLR in and headphone out for low latency. So that might solve the thing that you're looking for. Next question.
Tobias Moss is up next from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and asks, is there a way for Discord to function as a well-organized file sharing spot? Besides search, is there a way we can keep important links and file shares more organized?
I don't think that Discord is built for that. So I think we need to build a repository that allows us to do that, and it's on the roadmap. Go ahead, Sky.
What I've been trying to do is in chat links in the Discord every day, I will take all of the, Chris has created a way of downloading all of the chat links that are in the Makana, and I will scrape that and try to put it into that chat links in Discord. And to Alex's point, I hope it's useful. If nothing else, maybe we can dig that back out because there's a ton of amazing resources in there.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is interested in shirt guidelines for video conferencing, and he wonders about the pros and cons when selecting shirts. Should you match or contrast the background? Pitfalls such as colors, moire, matte, gloss, strategies to hide a mic, and so forth.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, this gets into a complex thing. And so all the parts of your video signal when you're on camera really should be paid attention to. And so the answer is, I'm wearing a dark shirt. If I didn't have that specific backlight on there, you wouldn't see my outline and I would look less human. I just kind of fade into it. So you want separation of the person you're looking at. You also want their face to be the primary thing you look at. So if anything happens in your shot so that the face doesn't have enough contrast versus any background, if the background is too bright or too dark and the face just doesn't stick out from that, then you've got something that you've got to address. In terms of moire and the rest of that, it's gotten more complex and simpler over the course of time. We've gotten way more resolution than we ever had back in the early days of broadcast TV, where things like Johnny Carson's Tie would go crazy on color TV. But in those days, the TVs were all consistent in terms of the signal that they traced. Today, you've got all sorts of computer monitors and TV screens that have higher and lower resolution. So it's really hard to tell, is this signal going to give you a problem? So when I recommend it to people going online, I usually say, try to do medium tone, usually pastels if you can, without patterns, because they always tend to look good. And try to stay away from full white or full black, because that will sometimes mess up with exposure on some things. And the biggest problem is you're never going to know what somebody's watching your shot on, so you can't really test everything. So try to stay inside the norms.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Icon black's probably not a good choice, but yeah, I'm here. Stay away from horizontal stripes of any size unless you're James May and that's a traditional shirt that you always wear. Simply because as they resize, as Bill mentioned, you will end up with noise patterns, which is what we call moire. But it's just a really good idea to stay away from those stripes. There is a whole field of experts on colors and colors for fashion and colors that match skin tones, and it's probably a second error in itself. But one simple tip is a collar, even if it's loose, when you're doing a Zoom with somebody professional, it looks more professional. So we might wear open neck shirts or whatever for just talking to your mates, but collar looks better. And
Noah.
if you're going up in business, a tie as well.
Go ahead, Noah.
I typically say don't wear solid white or solid black, even though I'm breaking that rule today, just for contrast. And then obviously Bill and Stuart had some great points too. And then finally, I do often contrast the background so that the subject pops.
Yeah, when we're asked for a short list, we basically tell the blacks tend to crush or they tend to show lots of grit, like all kinds of errata. So you know, black tends not to be a good one. White makes it hard for you to manage exposure because you'll blow out the collar or the shirt before you blow out the face, and so we tend to try to not go towards whites. We don't like colors to compete in general with people's facial color, so we tend to lean towards cooler colors, and we tend to desaturate them. And you shouldn't wear lines like I'm wearing today. So lines are bad. I was on a deadline, and I realized I didn't do the Mr. Rogers thing before the show. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Next question.
Do as we say, not do as we do.
Exactly.
Moving on to Jason Beish of Albuquerque, New Mexico. My X32 with Dante card arrives today from Sweetwater. Thank you, Alex, for the tip. I'm immediately lamenting the lack of faders. Which iOS has the panel that had for controlling this monster? Is the stock Behringer the best, and any alternatives worth noting?
Go ahead, John.
Welcome to the club, my friend. I use the stock app on my Macintosh. I'm interested to hear what Mickey says about an iPad app. But the one thing that might save you hours of time is the 10 gig adapter built into the iMac will not talk to the X32. Thanks to Mickey, solved that issue after multiple hours of work.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. Unfortunately the only controller that has a larger amount of support in terms of feature sets is the X-Touch, and I hope they would release a version that has better motorized faders because they don't feel that great. In terms of the iOS app, I haven't tried. I don't know of any other app that could natively talk directly to the X32, although you can do some sort of OSC patching and use an app like the Touch OSC to do it, but you'll need to build the patching for that.
Go ahead, Craig.
Basically, I was just going to mirror what Mickey already said. I'm quite happy with the iOS iPad app. The nice thing is you can also use the phone app if you want to do specific things like per channel. There is a phone version of it, I believe, and of course the Touch OSC.
Yeah, we've used X-Touches for basically when I get an X32, I know that an X-Touch is somewhere in the future, like for most of them. Next question.
Richard A. in London in the UK says, well, hi, what's the best 3D capture platform for using 6 DoF VR use, using LiDAR and photogrammetry techniques?
So that's a hard question. So best, because you say best 3D capture platform gets really expensive really fast. So when you start talking about best, so the best is probably thinking about something like a Faro 350 with a Theta, the newest Theta on top of it, to gather both imagery data as well as LiDAR data. There's a new one called, I think it's the X. There's a smaller Faro, but just to be clear, the 350 is like a $50 or $60,000 LiDAR. So these are, when you're talking about platforms, though, those are the platforms. If you're doing very large spaces like golf courses or something like that, you're probably going to mix that in with an SX10 from Trimble. And then, of course, there's the ZNFs, which are going to be the highest density and highest range. You can also get into things like a BLK 360, which is probably only about 20 grand, and it's a horrible thing to use, but it's relatively inexpensive. And then when you get into your phone, there's things like Polycam for kind of basic location stuff that you can grab onto. I think that a lot of the stuff, we're going to see a huge change in this over time, but I think from a location capture system, the Polycam is probably the least expensive, and at $10 or something, or $8 a month or something like that. It's a relatively inexpensive tool to grab onto scenes. It's still not perfect, but for what you're paying, it's a pretty good deal. You just need to have an iPhone with LiDAR. The thing you want to keep your eye out for is the object capture tools that are starting to pop out inside of the Apple platform. Next question.
Nick Batt in the UK is up next with, is Speedify a reliable service for bonding for streaming? Thinking about setting up high with a couple of cell phones or dongles attached.
Go ahead, Noah.
I no longer recommend Speedify for production. I bought the 3-year plan thinking it was going to be a great investment, and it wasn't. I currently own a PepLink Max HD2. I actually have 2 of those for production, but there's also the VideoU Go and some other bonding or load balancing routers that would do a much better job.
Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota says, to record an electric guitarist and a singer together for a one-take YouTube song cover, how would you mic it? Would you ever amplify the vocals and put the vocal effects live, or only record vocals raw and do the effects in post?
Go ahead, Noah.
Post-production definitely gives you more control. So try to get the cleanest, driest signal that you can. And Mickey just raised his hand, so he's going to be way better at this.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Okay, one take. I would mic, since it's an electric guitar, you'd probably have a cab in the same room, so I would give the vocalist a dynamic microphone, unless you're willing to somehow separate them into different rooms, which would take a lot more infrastructure. So I'd give a dynamic mic like standard SM58. I was looking for if I had one nearby. A standard SM58 for the vocalist, and the typical go-to for a cabinet would be a 57, and you can also double mic it with a condenser a little bit, or even a different dynamic to be able to spread it in the stereo space. So and like Noah mentioned, record it raw and do mixing and post. You have the flexibility there since you're not live.
Next question.
Next question from Tobias Moss again in Minneapolis. What methods exist to get an XLR mic into an iPhone to record video with better quality audio for quick social media video production?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, this is a similar question to the one earlier about feeding an audio interface into a mobile device. Although with an iOS device, it's a lot easier. Alex showed that interface, the little interface he had earlier, and also even a standard one from, and I'm going to spotlight Alex because he's showing it right now. That's the one from Shure, and also even a mix pre will show up on an iOS device as either a 2x2 interface or even a 12 by 4 interface if you have a mix pre 10.
Yeah, and the main thing is you just need to make sure that you have separate power. So for your Lightning interface, you have to have a power plus the USB, and then almost any USB interface will work with it. If you want something that's more direct and designed for it, we've also used a lot of Ceramonics. Ceramonics has stereo and mono inputs that we've used that just attach to it. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. The Ceramonics ones use little 9-volt batteries, and they're inexpensive. They're $150 to $200, depending on whether you want mono or stereo. And they have an official Apple license for the Lightning port, so they work reliably.
And they also do they'll mount onto your flash mount. So your cold shoe, you can mount them right to it. So if you're using things that will have those. Next question.
Next one comes from Stuart in Melbourne, Australia. Laptop with Thunderbolt 2 input, which is better for 3 camera shoots, an AJA IOXT or an AJA Kona4 in an eGPU style breakout box. At least 2 of the cameras are SDI only.
Go ahead, Mickey.
But yeah, I have right here an Echo 3 with a Kona, I believe it's a Kona 1 card in it. It works amazingly. I would go that route because it allows you to, move up in terms of what cards you can put in if you have more requirements in the future. But although one thing though with the IOXT that is nice is that it has a 4-pin locking XLR power input, which can be handy on location to have reliable connectors there that can't be pulled out.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says dark mode solutions. Dark mode enabled from the Windows setting. Dark Reader, the Chrome plugin, often overcorrects by corrupting white elements in photos. Any Microsoft Windows or Chrome solutions that darken my screen without overreaching?
I don't know. I actually don't know whether a lot of Windows people are using dark mode. I only guess that it's not that popular because when I get emails from folks with Windows and they're using Exchange, I get email trails that I can't read. So it's something to note, by the way, if you're dealing with a Mac person with dark mode, is if you set up a lot of stuff when you get from the Exchange server, especially from a Windows person, we can't read like half of it. We have to literally cut and paste it out somewhere else to see it because it's all showing up black on black. Anyway, so just a note, if you're wondering why people skip over your emails or you don't feel like they're reading them, they're not. All right, next question.
Eddie Scott in Mission Viejo, California is up next, and he says, what is going on with Ari's video? He appears to have a 2-pixel halo around his head.
Go ahead, Ari.
I'm still laughing inside because you read Dark Reader, but all I could hear was Darth Vader. These are actually acoustic panels, and they're mounted 6, 2x3. And that's what they are. I have a few of them around the studio, and I will say that if you want to mount panels like that, a good idea is to mount them on corrugated plastic because it doesn't bounce the audio as much, and it's also easy to hang on the wall with one screw. So
Go ahead,
that's
Noah.
what they are.
Josh and I were talking after hours actually yesterday. Ari, if you look at the edge of your skin, it looks like you almost have like a drop shadow or something on you. I think that's what the question is pertaining to. Like there's a white outline there.
And that is a sharpening filter. So that what you're seeing there, what camera are you using, Ari?
Presently, this is a Logitech C920.
Yeah, so what you're seeing there is sharpening. So anytime you see a lighter area turn a little darker and the outside around it turning brighter, that's a sharpening filter that's turned on. There may be a sharpening either, maybe you've manually turned it up or almost all cameras have sharpening. So they all sharpen to some degree. And what you'll see it in probably more is because of that red background. I bet you if you turn that red background off, we may not see it. Because
this is just an LED brick, which is
right
here.
But,
and actually, I know.
Sorry, go ahead. You know.
I noticed today, for some reason, I noticed a bit of weird shifting around my neck. I don't know if I turned the hue of the light a bit or something like that, but
yeah, it's activating the sharpening filter. So the way sharpening works is it actually makes the darker things a little darker and the lighter things a little lighter, and that's how it creates the impression that things are sharper than they actually are. It's a low pass filter with a high, anyway. So there's a high pass filter that's being hard mixed into it. Anyway, so you can build them yourself in Photoshop, in case you're wondering. It's been around for a long time. Every camera does it because the way our CMOS sensors work is the red, green, and blue pixels are not on top of each other, and so they're actually all the raw images coming from your cameras are all a little soft when they come in, so they get sharpened, and this is one of the pieces of it, and it's how far you sharpen it. But when it sharpens a lot, you get what we call haloing, and what you're seeing with Ari is haloing, and that haloing is something that is like, the reason I know a lot about it is because when you do green screen, sharpening is the devil. So because when you try to do a green screen removal, it can't figure out what to do with that white area, and so that's also why it is also why a lot of your virtual backgrounds don't work, is because the webcams are sharpening, and so it basically destroys the edge. So usually when you're green screening, you want to turn that down a little bit. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with Audinate, introducing Dante Applications Library and other connectivity tools for Dante. Where does that leave Waves SoundGrid in the audio over Ethernet market?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So yeah, I've only really seen the SoundGrid network in play between actual consoles and an engine where the processing is happening. I haven't really seen it actually being used for the entire audio network. That's really where Dante shines, and also to an extent Maddie, although it's not an IP networking standard, but it's still very much in use these days.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I remember going to a festival where they had the lighting director at front of house, but the video director was backstage. Wouldn't it be best to put them side by side, considering how lighting and video work together these days?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, they work together, and they don't actually talk to each other direct. even if they're standing side by side, they will talk over comms. So it doesn't actually matter if they're in the same space or not. The thing is, when it comes to what goes out in front of house, you really only want it to be essential items. Two reasons for that is because crowds are unpredictable and they break stuff. And secondly, is everything you put out in that crowd space takes up space for seats, which you sell and which you make money from. So anything you can put behind stage or backstage is a better choice. The other thing is with the video director, especially because they're talking on comms to the camera crew the whole time, is they will want to be in a quieter or soundproofed environment so that they're not having to shout over the music for the camera operators to hear. And I know that from personal experience.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Exactly what the Stewart says. That's what comms are for.
Literally, if we're sitting next to each other, we're using comms. like we just put, you just put comms on. You don't even want to you have to raise your voice to the person next to you or reach over or whatever. You just put the headsets on and then you talk to each other. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, directors also are individual human beings. There are all sorts of them that have different priorities in mind. It's common said that for an action movie, you might want a director who's really, really good at special effects. And for a drawing room comedy, you might want to have a director who's really good with the interaction with people. Directors all have to do all of these things, but they are stronger in one set of skills than they might be in another. So that director who wanted to be backstage may have just had a different orientation for that show. They're all humans. They're different.
Next question. Nope. Next question. Oh, next question.
Tommy Chance is up next. And Tommy says, what does it take on a remote end to control the PTZ cameras?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Many PTZ cameras run on a protocol called Visca, and Visca controllers are just run on a regular IP network, and those can be VPN into the remote network where the cameras are. And also, I'd love to hear what Doug has to say about this because he does this a lot.
Doug, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, anything that's IP based, if you have a VPN, it's just the VPN makes it so that the IP is on the same network. So it doesn't matter if you're in the next room right next to each other or clear across the country. If you have that. Now, for my particular thing with the 3-play controller, it connects to the 3-play with USB, and there was a software that we used called Virtual Here that I had installed on my local computer, and through that it converts USB to IP, but it worked great.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says the classic Roland 808 kick has been a stalwart of many genres of music. Could you create an accurate emulation without the actual Roland hardware or Roland's own software?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right, I got to start with this. There is nothing like an analog synth. There is nothing like an analog synth. That said, the 808, I'm going to completely butcher this name. I'll put a link in Mukana, but Yoshinosuke Haruchi, I think, something like that, made a really good software emulation a little while ago that really impressed me. So I'll put that in chat.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, you can find all kinds of samples on the internet. Mars samples is a very economical choice, or you could go directly to Roland and pay about $150 and get the direct 808.
And the 808, I mean, am I correct that this is what Behringer builds as the RD8 MK2 or RD8 is the hardware knockoff of the Roland 808, I believe, as well. And there's a RD8 and there's an RD8 MK2. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back up with with the high cost of vector work being about $3,045 US without maintenance or vision, and capture, which is US $2,544 for a Symphony Edition license. Could you see Unreal Engine gaining users and share in the lighting visualization market?
Stuart.
Yes, and it already has. I was actually going to suggest having a look at Cinema 4D, because I know there is a lighting package available for it that is specifically modeled from actual lights, including ranges such as aperture and ARRI and whatever. Then I looked at the perpetual pricing and it was actually higher than Vectorworks. But okay, so for a beginner option to be able to do this sort of lighting, do some previews and what have you, have a look at DAZ Studio of all things. And you can do iRay based like photorealistic lighting. It's very big in the arts community, and you can export through to other major packages as well. And some packages are already using it for doing the modeling and the costuming in DAZ Studio, and then exporting to the main package for the animation and the rendering.
A lot of folks that we've been talking about this in after hours a little bit, seem to be leaning towards thinking Unreal is probably going to be the future, partially because of the price and partially because of its real-time nature and its support of DMX. so you can actually tie those cameras, tie the lighting and lighting control directly into Unreal. So we definitely think that Unreal is probably a viable thing here. The other thing to look at, which was kind of a blind spot for me, which is relatively new, which is Adobe's different 3D tools that they built. I spent a big chunk of the weekend inside of Substance Painter, which turns out to be a great way to throw textures and so on and so forth onto USDZ models, which is what I was using it for. We'll talk about it in the future. But I think that Adobe has done a really good job of making something that's relatively cost effective. It still has the monthly, there's a monthly bill to it, but it's relatively cost effective. And it also is very easy to use. It's really designed for print designers who don't know 3D to do 3D, and they still have to learn. There's still a learning curve for them, but it's not designed as you had to have done a ton of 3D to understand how to use it. So I would definitely take a look at it. There's a 30-day trial, which I'm using right now. I begrudgingly, no matter how much I complain about Adobe, I'm probably going to buy in to it because it's a really good application. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. During the height of COVID in New York, ex-Governor Cuomo promulgated an emergency executive order to make online weddings legal. That has been rescinded now, but could it be a market opportunity for people like us if the law allowed?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, extracting all the emotional and religious constructs out of it, marriages are technically really kind of contracts. They came from that old system of progenity and real estate being passed along and things like that. So it's really a torts question, I think, or a contract law question about what parts of the wedding ceremony's effect on legal rights can be done virtually and safely. I mean, that is a huge part of the transfer of property in the world. So I'm not at all an expert in any of those things, but I think that's the problem.
We've done a fair, I've done fair different kinds of weddings. Back in another life, I DJ'd weddings, so I've been to a lot of them. But I've done 360 weddings, and we've done remote cameras at weddings to include people online. I actually have leaned towards. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity to at least incorporate live, feeds from the wedding for people who can't make it. I think that there's a real opportunity there for people to feel like they were part of it. So I think at least that would be useful. Okay, now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to bring Richard Lavery. He's already here. We're going to bring him to the spotlight and have him kind of give us an overview of what he's been working on. And this is not, by the way, a breakdown of the Belfast method that we do on Saturdays. This is a specific project that Richard and his team took on, and we talked about breaking it down. So Richard, I'm going to go ahead and let you just kind of start running with it.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, this is what I thought would be helpful is the live view system that lots of people might have heard of, the live view at home system. We recently deployed it for the first time ever, and I thought we often
can you explain what the live view? And by the way, if you have questions while Richard's talking, go ahead and throw those questions into Makana. But can you explain a little bit about what that live view at home is?
Yes, I will do. The reason why I thought it would be helpful in this instance is because we were starting from a perspective of having never deployed it ever before. So it meant that rather than Jeff Keithley, who's probably the guru to go to for all the fine-grained technical things, this is the kind of thing of if you've never ever started up, we managed to set it up and deploy it for a large festival within a month and a month and a bit. The process kind of started a little bit further out, but the live view at home essentially refers to where you are broadcasting with it doesn't have to be specifically live view, but live view use the term at home, where you're broadcasting from a venue back to a main control room. So in journalism, that's broadcasting from one end of the country back into your main control room, and then mixing it there rather than on site. So you're sending up one to multiple camera feeds in via cellular data back into a control room, and then that's where you're mixing it and adding on the graphics and doing camera control and all the kind of other kind of things. So that's essentially what we deployed for a festival called the Cathedral Quarter Arts Festival in Belfast. The kind of reason that we went down the live view route was this was our brief, where we would have to do multiple live performances, sometimes on the same day in different venues in the same kind of geographical location. So the challenge for me was, because thankfully we had about 4 months lead time to prep for it, was what system would we deploy in each of those locations? Would we take down a full system and then strike it and move it to the next venue within a few hours? Could we do that with keeping a high quality level? What would that look like? And how would we manage to actually ensure nothing gets broken, damaged, or all the kind of standard logistical kind of things? So these were our 3 different venues, and these are in-person events. So everything had an audience in it that we had to negotiate as well. So we had 3 different 3 different locations, and one of which has no internet access whatsoever. It was in the middle of a square, and that was the largest of all the locations as well, around about 250 to 300 people in a marquee. And then the other ones were locations where we've actually streamed from before, so they have some internet, but not great. You're kind of talking about 10 megs up, and so forth. So I had the pleasure of trying to think of how to design this over a period of time. So these are my little drawings that I tend to use as I'm starting to try and design how something will work. And I thought about streaming bridges. I thought that I actually brought a fair number of the questions to office hours over the last 4 to 5 months, kind of asking, well, how might this work? How might you do this? All these kind of things. And I went through different ideas of leaving ATEMs in every venue. So we would just move the cameras between each venue rather than taking down the actual set or taking down the actual monitors and switcher and so forth. Went through different ideas of kind of how to kind of move the signal out, how to receive the signal. So even kind of thinking about screen scraping ideas, kind of taking it out with a live view solo up to Vimeo, and then taking that down, a live view solo per camera kind of ideas, all this kind of stuff. I chatted to Jeff, who kind of recommended the idea of using the LU800, which was the first time I kind of had heard it. And then that's when I started to coalesce with the ideas of how to use the LU800 and whether we could afford it, whether we could deploy it, and whether it would be reliable enough. So the system kind of started to roughly kind of come together. So this was my first sketch of what we would do, which then kind of turned into this. Where we would deploy 3 PT-Z cameras, the LU800, which is the live view's backpack, which if you've ever used a live view before, it's usually a single camera system. The LU800 is their new multicam system. We can have up to 4 cameras, or 1 camera, which is 4K, streaming out up to 70 megs per second in 1080, 60K, 60 frames per second, sorry, and it transmits over HEVC and at 8 to 10 bits, depending upon what you're doing and what quality level you're doing at. So I decided to use PT-Z cameras specifically for this, to allow for the fact that each of the venues we would have very little setup time. We'd have to adapt quite a lot on the fly to what the situation is. We could pre-plan camera positions, which I'll look at in a wee bit. But there was a lot of variables. I looked at kind of using our URSAs instead of using the PT-Zs, but we felt that kind of the PT-Zs would be the most reliable for how we would do it. But also that gives us the option for remote control, remote shading from the control room rather than having to manually shade the URSAs on site. Though I did come up with another way of remote shading the URSAs, but we're not going to go into that. So that system then looked like this, with our 3 Panasonic PT-Zs, an X32 rack, the LU800, a couple of Blackmagic audio embedders, a Netgear Nighthawk, and then a Netgear switch.
And were you moving this from one place to the other, or were you leaving a couple of these setups in place?
No, it was struck every single time. Usually the hardest day was when we would move it from the black box location to the marquee location, and we had, I think, 3 hours in between to strike, reset, and sound check before the actual deployment. So this is kind of the stuff that we took on site. But actually, the amount of stuff that we took on site also included all of this. So I tried to design it to make it the simplest setup as possible, but it always, we add more gear, add more things. So as a note, this is on a PDF in the Discord chat, so I'll move past things quite quickly, lists of things, because you can just look at all the gear lists on Discord if you need to.
What was the shotgun mic for?
Shotgun audience, crowd noise.
Yep.
So getting up a bit of feeling of the rooms that we're in. We didn't deploy it at the very beginning. That actually came back a little bit later, because we felt it goes into a different kind of point of I don't miss the audience noise, but some people do. So we just made sure we added it in to make, especially for the comedy shows, to allow for something, a little bit of feeling, a little bit of atmosphere. So the in-control room system looks like this, which is then based around the LU4000. That's the receiving server that the LU800 streams back to. Again, it can receive up to 4 1080 streams or 1 4K stream. And then we have our Clearcasters, our ATEMs, and our camera control, and different kind of video hubs and so forth. The full kind of list again involves these extra bits that kind of all get added on and increase the complexity, which I'll go through in a wee second as well.
And the with the live view that you took out, the LU800, were you using the extender, or was it just the live view with the modems that it had?
Just the live view with the modems it had. So it has up to 8 cellular modems. It can do 4G and 5G. We were using ours on 4G, and we're just using it with the base kind of cell pack. So main kind of software we used, a whole range of things that we've heard mentioned on office hours, from QLab all the way down to just kind of the mix effect and so forth, and then a whole load of extra little kind of bits and pieces as well, with Dante kind of doing little things. One of the interesting things about the whole festival was that there's one show that would be online only, and so we had to build a system that would both at least in the control room side, receive out the gigs from outside, but also be able to switch over really, really quickly to an internal Zoom ISO-based show. So that's where the kind of video router kind of came in, which we introduced quite late in the day on our end. So all this ended up looking like this. So we have the LU800 kind of connecting to each of the cameras via this SDI. We have then the Netgear giving power, but also IP control to each of the cameras. So that allowed us to remotely control each of the cameras from the main control room over a system called IP Bridge that the live use. Each of the cameras only had 2 cables going to it.
Does the IP Bridge basically give you like a VPN type of connection?
Yeah, it basically makes the LiveView 800 the devices on the other end appear as if they're on the network here.
Right.
And so we can, there was, after you set up the port forwarding kind of protocols and things like that, essentially it's really simple. As soon as you turn it on, it starts streaming, and you have to be streaming to get control,
Right.
unfortunately. They appear as if they're on the network over here. We also had the 800 can transmit up to 16 channels of audio, but it had to be embedded on the SDI channels. So we had a SDI embedder as well, coming from the X32. The X32 was for us to receive out of the main desks. We had a fair amount of negotiation with each venue to talk through with their sound techs about what mixes we would get, how we would get these, would they be able to give us DCAs, different things, all about pre-negotiation with each of the venues to try and get as much information and data, or find the pain points early and negotiate with them and make sure that they were happy with where we were coming in, because we were unfortunately the third fiddle, not even second fiddle. We were third fiddle in the physical locations because the venue wanted to prioritize, and the festival wanted to prioritize the in-person audience. So we were kind of having to come in, be very, very careful. We were crammed into some locations, and I'll show you those in a wee bit. So we had to be really careful. And one of the reasons why we deployed the 800 system was to allow for our footprint in each location to be really light. So it was light to strike, but also light to be in each venue, really thin and quite easy to deploy. So we also have the little Netgear, as I mentioned, a little Nighthawk, and that ran our comms just as a backup to cellular, just to make sure that we always had comms back to the main control room. So then the main system broke down to look something like this, where we have the main 800, the main 4000 connecting into the internet, and then connecting down via SDI into the video hub to the multi-view to the ATEM, and then one record out to a Hyperdeck. And then on top of that, we also then have the control of their advanced panel, and then we had 3 aux outs to 3 different encoders to make sure that we had redundancy, which was very helpful because our Clearcaster died halfway through one show, and we had to move over to the backup.
When you say died, what do you mean? Did the power supply die?
I've got a video of it, if anyone ever wants to see it. But it had dropped frames and started to increasingly drop frames a couple of shows, and nothing massive to worry about. Actually, I think I brought up as a question in office hours during that time. And there's one show for Bruno Gallagher, which is one of the largest shows we had, and I don't know how to even describe it. Basically, the monitor feed coming out of it would freeze and stall and then drop. And we'd had a conversation with Wowza before this, and as soon as I showed them the video of it, it was like, okay, RMA that right now. So it was no negotiation with them. They've sent us a replacement unit. So that's why we have, as you can see on that kind of chart, our little LiveView Solo, as well as a Blackmagic Web Presenter as backups out of the building. The LiveView Solo ended up being probably our main encoder for the rest of the festival after that point, because it's again bonding our Ethernet as well as with cellular. So it was LiveView in and LiveView out for the whole festival. Additional to that is our graphics playout, as well as kind of other kind of little bit playouts going into the system, as well as Mix Effect on an iPad coming in. So that was our kind of main kind of setup for most of the at-home shows. As I said, the Sumiso shows are slightly different. The LU800 has options on how delayed your feed can be. So it can be as little as 1 second. It can actually be sub 1 second if you're only using one camera, but it can go up to as long as 20 seconds. So for most of the shows, we would start with a 1 second delay to set up all the cameras and preset and communication with the team. And then we would move to a 10 or 20 second delay, depending on how we felt the connection would be. So we started with the RP150 controlling the cameras from the control room, but we really quickly realized that it wasn't going to work as well as we liked with that delay, even using presets. So in the first couple of shows, we would have, things like the team on site calling up on comms that obstruction certain cameras, and the delay then was brilliant because then we have 10 seconds notice before one camera was obstructed to make sure we're on a different camera, which was really handy. But we had no ability to properly track. We had no ability to properly kind of build super sources really dynamically. So we quickly moved the RP150 down to the actual site as controlled by then an operator on site instead. So that then just slotted really quickly into the system, just using the same kind of Ethernet power over our Netgear switch. And then it was directly connected as well. So the other thing we had on site, which isn't on the diagram, is just a standard PC, which was connected into the same switch to allow for redundant control over just a web interface for the cameras as well. So if the RP150 went down, then we would also have a PC control to get to the presets or get to the cameras or shade and so forth. You'll see that in a little bit of video a little bit later on. So these are our 3 venues. So we have a couple of just standard kind of placements for our cameras. We had, in the marquee was the worst because we again had to negotiate 250 people. Cameras were at the back of the room, one for wide shots, one for closes, and then one just slightly further forward to allow to get nicer side profile angles if we needed. The black box is really difficult because again 3 cameras and our own positioning into tiny space at the back of the room was really difficult. But then that's again why not having to have a huge monitor, not having to have all the kind of different gear down there to make sure that all the redundant gear, just having the cameras and the 800 essentially on each side really proved very helpful. So then this is what it looks like on site. So with I don't know if you can hear the little bit of audio. I'll try to make sure it was really low, so it's not going to disturb things. But this is kind of the look of what the system looks like from the perspective of the setup. So you can see Emma, my colleague, waving in the right-hand video. So that's kind of what the 800 looks like when you have the monitor on. You can see we're just using 3 cameras there, and then we were down to a 1 second delay on that kind of setup. This marquee one was again kind of why the whole system was really useful to be deployed, because I had to deploy it myself in about an hour because we had 2 staffing issues during the festival. As Alex says, logistics is always the key. So we lost 1 staff member to COVID, and we lost 1 staff member to a family disaster on that day. So then I had to come down from the control room and then set up the whole system whilst I gave our other staff member a break. So it was really deployable really quickly, and you can see there kind of the Netgear switch connected in, and the RP150 connected in, and everything else. Then our other location was we've got a couple of videos off. So you can see there's the PC backup control, Emma's comms as she kind of comes in, and then we have right at the back of the room again, right beside the sound desk. You can see kind of our sound engineer as well standing beside X32, and there's Emma saying hello on the camera as she flips that around. I like Sky waved at her there. This was a month ago, Sky, but yes, there you go. So in the control room, then on our end, we have our kind of standard setup. And this is set up for all the shows, all the Belfast shows. It looks really similar to this. So we have our preview monitors, our program, the multi-view monitor. So the multi-view monitor allows us to have a separate monitor for up to 16 cameras or 16 inputs, or down to as little as only 4. So you can see there that that's our 3 cameras plus our graphical playout. And what's really nice about the multi-view 16s monitor is it's much higher definition than the standard ATEM monitor. It makes it much easier to tell focus, much easier to tell quality level than the standard ATEM, which is 1080i. So then we got the super source controlled through mix effect again, so we can easily on the fly kind of control this. And then so for a lot of the shows, we had 2 team members down on site, and then just me in the control room managing everything else. So it was really, again, a very light lift. Each of the computers has these kind of amounts of software. This is how it's broken down. So we have one kind of main monitor computer, so we can check audio levels on YouTube. We can turn on remotely the LU800 from the control room. We can connect into it. We can actually see on the breakdown each of the cellular data controls. I was able to change some cell signals over to another cell signal if we felt it was too dim in one location. What's really nice is that they give you SIMs that are can go onto any network, so you can on the fly change it to virtually any network really, really quickly and really easily. We had one computer which ran our graphics packages, and then one computer which ran and then also not the ATEM software control. This is what our rack looks like, which is underneath our advanced panel, right in the position that if you have your knee, you can hit it really badly. So I don't advise that position.
It's the little things. It's the little things in there.
Knee guards.
It always scares me that we're just going to do something bad on it. So at some stage when I rebuild it, we did rebuild. I had to rebuild the system 2 times before we actually went live for this festival.
It always starts with, I think it can fit under the desk, and it always ends up in some other room and sometimes some other part of the building over time, because you just don't want to deal with it. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to deal with it. And it's like, yeah.
That's it. Because at the bottom, so you can see here we've got our Clearcaster at the top. We've got our video hub, then into the ATEM and into the multi-view. Then the very bottom is the actual LU4000. And the reason I rebuilt the system a couple of times before we went live, before we actually went to the festival, is that the LU4000 makes the jet plane level noise when it turns itself on and needed moved. So this is what it looks like when you rip apart your system 2 days before. No, it wasn't 2 days, but this is what repatching the whole thing looked like. So then these are the actual events. That's how we link to the festival. I'll put it in Makana, but you can see all of these shows that we did. They're all on YouTube still. Most of them, I think some of them will go down at some point, but this is them. And in the PDF that I've put onto Discord, as I said, there is also a couple of data sheets and so forth with the specs of the 800 and the specs of the 4000 as well, and links to their actual main data sets as well if you need to. So there you go.
Great presentation, by the way. That was that. As someone who builds them, that wasn't easy to put together. So really, really appreciate the effort to put together something so clear. So thanks for doing that. Really, really fantastic. And let's jump into the questions.
We start with John Barker in Malmo, Sweden, who's watching and says, for live view equipment, was it mostly plug and play, or was there a lot of setup?
It's a mixture. It definitely is very close to plug and play, but it's not. So the 4000, which is the server in the control room, needs a lot of port forwarding things. If you've never used a server before, you have to get used to the idea of working in Ubuntu, and just ever so slightly, it's not massive. I'm not a coder. I'm not used to servers, but I was able to deploy it myself with a little bit of advice and help from the support from LiveView. So it's definitely very doable, but you'll give yourself a good lead-in time. As I said, that I spent a fair amount of time in the months ahead researching what system, and I talked to Jeff Keithley about what he would do if he was in the same position. He's had the LU800 straight away, and then I'd spend another 2 months working out whether we could afford it, which is a separate question. So it's very, very doable, but there are a couple little drawbacks. So the first time we took it on site to test it, I went down on site with it, and we turned it on, nothing. Didn't receive it in the control room whatsoever. We had to reboot the server twice, and then it just worked. A little bit of pants worry whenever that happens to you on your first off-site test. The first show we did, it did the same thing, but because we'd done the test, we knew what to do. So there you go.
Yeah, I had at least two live views for years, and same experience. Just every once in a while, you got to kick the tires a couple times and tap the hood. But outside of that, once they get going, they're going. It's just a little bit of a startup.
No, we never lost a single stream, anything from the locations, apart from one lovely incident that happened in the Marquee, which is the Bruno Gallagher gig. If you ever look at it, you'll find out, you'll see that for some reason we have two cameras at the end of the gig to cut between. Because an audience member bumped into our controller, who then bumped into the live view and then knocked it off our stand, and then that crashed the stream. And we got it back up and running within I think 30 seconds to a minute, but the third camera didn't come back straight away, and we just had to go, no, we're going with two. And once you start it, you can't add cameras in. You have to have all your cameras in and connected before you hit go. You can't add one in after that point. The other issue is that and this scared me all the way through.
And I think that's because it's syncing the cameras. It's making sure that they're going out frame accurate.
And that's a really good point, because one of the reasons why I went with the live view system is because it does sync those things. We don't have to worry about trying to frame match anything. They do it all for you within a certain tolerance level. But it's worth noting that the number one input on the 800 is God. You will, if you kill that input, you will kill the entire device. So you have to be really careful with it. None of the other cameras will turn on unless you have something in an SDI one.
Because it's using that as a reference, is my guess. Yeah. Next question.
Comes from Roscoe Jones, who apparently has moved to Disneyland. Anyway, he says the Panasonic 150s can have preset views. Did you use these to generate smooth panning and zooming while controlling remotely?
Yes, yeah. We spent a fair amount of time in the preset when in the pre-show, as they're doing rehearsals, as the audio guys are doing, down in the audio, the video, we would be looking at the presets of band positions, build these in, build in, as Ross was probably mentioning, the pre-mem, which is a certain remembering a certain camera move, so a certain type of pan. So yeah, we spent a fair amount of time. We have our special chart that has every single camera with every single preset, with every single kind of thing just recorded on a chart beside the director and beside the camera controller, so that we know exactly what we want to go to at any time. It's a really, really helpful system, and the RP150 is designed up to 200 cameras it can control. Goodness knows the budget for 200 Panasonics, but it's fantastic.
Next question.
John Barker in Malmo, Sweden is back, and he says, if you were to do this again, what pieces of gear would you not use next time?
It's interesting. We did start the whole festival without the X32 in the mix. We aimed to just take a direct feed from some of the desks, but we needed enough more fine-grained control. So at the moment, what we're trying to work out isn't necessarily what we'd take away. It's more about how would we get all 16 channels out of the venues? How would we negotiate that with the venue? And then we would do the whole audio mix back in the control room rather than having to only have fine. Basically, the X32 is we could replace it with a Flow 8, which is one of the reasons why I have a Flow 8 now, is to do that job. Because all that we were doing with it was gain and just making sure that there was enough level getting back up to us. We were really heavily reliant upon the in-venue techs letting us either use their desk or or creating a mix for us. Some of them are really good at that. Some of them are not. So there's one of the shows which is just has a absolutely awful mix for one of the, because we couldn't get them to get this a good mix for that specific show. It was mixed for in room. They give us a really similar mix from outside, and no matter how we tried to very gently ask them to, we couldn't get anything better. And then one of the other venues was fantastic. They recorded the stems from the rehearsal and then remixed based on the stems, our own special mix for the online. So at the moment, that's what we're kind of researching, is how to get use all 16 audio channels just to bring up more, so that we can control more. But that involves, a lot of negotiation with the venues.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next and says, if you had a mix engine supporting full remote control like the Allen and Heath D Live and a control surface, could you mix for both broadcast and the venue remotely?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do in some ways, where we could, with the venue techs, negotiate. But by the time we got to the end, we would have actually the iPad version of the whatever mixer they had. We would have the software control on hand in case they would let us simultaneously mix it. Some venues will just not. There's no negotiations going to let the sound engineer is going to prioritize what they have in that room. But there's a lot of options there for how we might do it, and we want to essentially take that audio out of the building and mix it here, so we have as fine a control as we can have. But on site, it's as much about how can we negotiate access to their mixers, and sometimes there'll be remote control options for that, where we could do it from the control room. Sometimes there won't be. It's going to be what's down to the venue and the sound tech's comfort level.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, did you run into any issues with venue IT staff when getting the network access you needed?
That's the nice thing about the 800 is that we didn't have to do anything with any venue IT staff. Essentially, we're taking it all via cellular. And sometimes if there was Ethernet available, we were just adding a couple of megs to their system. So there was no problems negotiating. I mean, we went down to each venue and we did venue tests at different times of the day. We did tests with the 800 in place. We did different speed tests over the different venues networks, and we tried to replicate the conditions in the marquee with hundreds, if not thousands, of people around us at the same time. So testing as much as we can, but thankfully the 800 eliminates a lot of the problems of having to negotiate with a larger venue's IT staff.
Well, and I think that one of the advantages of using the LU800 in this venue specific, or this size of venue specifically, is that as the venues get larger, the L800 becomes less useful because the cell sites get saturated. So so what you're depending on once we get to these venues were maybe up to 100, maybe a little bit more.
The largest venue would be about 300, but they're all in city center locations as well, which means that you've got everyone who's out and about on the same night in the same areas around you as well. So right. It did really well, but yes, I was a bit nervous about how much of a load. But what was nice is that because as I mentioned before, we could see the activity on each SIM. So I was able to change it to, if I found that there was only 2 bars on one SIM, I was able to change that to a different network that had more bars.
Interesting.
And allowed it so it gave a much finer granular control. And each SIM is only sending up at max around about 4 megs to get so we were about 8 megs per camera, and then we negotiate with LiveView at the one stage to get more megs if we wanted to, but you can also bandwidth limit each of the cameras, which is really nicely, you can limit it to even less than 8 megs or more as well.
Yeah, the what we find is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people or above, the live views start to become, depending on where you're at, they become less and less useful just because of saturation to the cell towers. Next question.
Liberty White here in the panels up next, and she said, what did your rehearsal time look like? You mentioned that you were third fiddle, and I'm curious to how that impacted the final product.
The worst example of this was one of the opera gigs. So each of the events, most of them were music, but a couple of them were slightly more diverse than that. And one of those was an opera gig. And the way that the opera team the production team had designed it is that it would move around the venue as well, which means, and none of them are mic'd. So it means that, and because it's a relatively small venue, they don't need amplification, which means that we had to design how we were going to mic roaming opera singers within a tight location with no rehearsal time and no access to them pre-production before the day. So getting there early is usually the main thing, and making sure you're there, don't miss sound check, and then spending as much time talking to the cast and kind of making sure make them as comfortable as possible. The opera team wanted us to individually mic them with lapels or with headsets, and I kind of nixed it, even though I think in hindsight it probably would have been better, but I nixed it because there just wasn't enough time to make the actors comfortable with them. They've never worked there. Most of these opera singers were young singers, and they wouldn't have been used to do things. And it was good that we didn't do it at the same time, because at least one of them, we did lapel mic two of them who had speaking parts, and I think one of them, I halfway through, I think one section, I comms down to Marty, our audio guy, and said, Marty, we're not getting much from her. And then I looked and could see her. She had the pack in her hand, and she had taken it off and then not bothered to put it back on, but she was holding it. It was really weird. So yeah, don't let your talent mic up.
Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle, Washington here on the panel. Richard, you are putting in a lot of effort to create this system. Why are you doing it?
I suppose if the pandemic has shown us that there's a large industry here for venues like ours, which is quite a small venue, to stream from our location and stream out, get access to a much wider audience. The end of the pandemic will be, we've made a lot of contacts, but they won't always want us to stream from where we are. So they'll want us to come to them and stream from where they are in any number of different venues around the country. That's kind of why I'm trying to design this system and trying to find a couple of ways of doing it. And the particular choice for the live view is that we will, touch wood, never lose a stream. We'll always be able to adapt to any situation we're given, again, touch wood. But we'll be able to do what we've started to perfect or get good at in what we do, and do it from any venue in the city without having to say, yes, we can definitely do that for you here in Accidental. But yeah, okay, you want to do it in the Black Box, you want to do it in the Mac, you want to do it in any number of different venues. Yes, we can now do that for you as well. So that's why I spent the amount of time kind of, it's that end of pandemic question is, well, yes, you can do that where you are, but can you come to us and do that as well?
Well, I just continue to applaud you, sir. You are leading by example. You are continuing to take one step at a time. You are failing upward. All of those cliches that make good T-shirts, you're wearing them proudly, and I'm just so grateful for you. Thank you.
I think that there's such an incredible opportunity to build a network of theaters, and that are, whether it's music or acting or all kinds of other things, to no longer be geographically constrained by who your audience is going to be. So we're in this very beginning, and I think that when I look at what Richard's doing, I see this opportunity where, not all the theaters want to develop that expertise, and it wouldn't make sense for them to develop the back end to do that. And if you look at what we're doing on Saturdays with Richard's team, is as we figure out how to do that, we now have the potential of this huge team that's able to provide support for Richard's node, which is then able to provide support to local venues, which are then able to have access to the whole world, to watch what's going on there. And I think that it's, as it evolves, I think it's going to become the norm, for a lot of things. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, did you have any issues with overheating or excessive humidity in the accidental control room or at any of the venues?
No, I mean we're in roughly in the summertime in Northern Ireland, but Northern Ireland doesn't get that warm, for to put it mildly. But the only problem with it was noise. I mean, we made sure with all the equipment that it wasn't too close to other pieces of equipment. Even in our rack, from the photo that you saw, there's one RU between every single device. So we try and make sure that all the heat is dissipated as much as possible. Our control room is in a basement, which is where I'm sitting at the moment, where so it does tend to, it can get quite warm if everything's running, but it's more about noise is our issue. The RU800, the LU800 does get warm, and the LU4000 does get warm, but nothing in any way at a worrying level or performance affecting level, more to speak.
Yeah, I will admit we use the heat, as our equipment can't handle the heat. We always say, we needed the venue to be 75 degrees. Like you'll always hear me say 75 degrees, or you have to put us into a room that we can manage to 75 degrees. And I use the equipment. I shouldn't say this on YouTube. I use the equipment, but a lot of it is I find that there's a lot higher CPU errors in the operators when it goes over 75 degrees, mostly that they want to go to sleep without any kind of it's just hard to stay awake when you sit there and work on a long event at 75 degrees or more. Is just hard for everybody to concentrate. And so I try to use the equipment as the shield to keep it. I prefer it to be in the high 60s, which would be like 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. Next question.
Mike Beardmore in Reading, UK. I attended a band recording event in a similar marquee to yours. There was a gale in progress. My recording had the clatter of the structure while the broadcast audio was beautifully clean. How would you filter the clatter out?
Thankfully we didn't have that problem. We were taking it directly out of all the mics on stage. So we were taking a direct band out. We weren't doing any kind of room miking at all, which then allows for a much nicer and cleaner sound. So thankfully, we didn't have that issue. I don't know how we would have dealt with it other than, hey, that's a nice recording of what happened on that day.
This doesn't work in all the buildings. I worked in a venue a couple of years ago that they grew grass on the roof. It was a metal roof, and then they restructured it and grew, like when you saw grass on the roof, and I asked them why they did that, and they said it was for the rain, like for the venue. Like the grass doesn't make any noise when it hits. You just have to figure out the drainage and everything else. It was the cheapest thing for them to do is to pour dirt on it and grass. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville is back again with, from a 10,000 foot view, what benefit does the live view system give you?
I think it's sort of that answered that a little bit earlier, in that it gives me a lot more flexibility going forward. We can go anywhere. We can build exactly as Alex says. We can deliver a high quality stream for any venue really quickly with a really little lift. And as I mentioned, the team for this was relatively small, and it got as small as one person on site and one person in control.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman asks, why is the ATEM monitor at 1080i? Or 1080 just says.
I don't know.
Yeah, the older, not the older, but the ones that are not constellations are limited to, I think, a 1080i signal on the way out. So that they're designed to be easy to use with any monitor that you might connect it to. And then that selection became more granular with the constellation and some of the other advanced like an all-in-one switchers. But for the server switchers, their outputs are 1080i for the 4ME, 2ME, which are all current switchers and great switchers. Just they don't have that. They're a little longer in the tooth. We expect that to be updated with the next generation. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, with Streamweaver or a similar product, could you have even controlled the venue lighting remotely?
With Streamweaver right now, I think what we're still trying to get is venue control of our lighting from Tlaloc outside of Belfast. So within this kind of situation, I think it's more negotiation that you're going to have to do with the venue. I most of the venues in the way that this situation was deployed wouldn't, we wouldn't have any need for the remote control, but we also wouldn't be allowed remote control of the lighting. It's mostly about negotiating with the venue beforehand on site visits, about making sure we had enough of a light level for our cameras and discussion, all again beforehand.
Yeah, I think that the way I see that this progression is going to happen is that you're going to start with just whoever's willing to play, and you kind of negotiate and get the best you can. But I do think the future, as we start thinking about networks of theaters, is that theaters will have to meet a certain spec. They'll have to have a certain amount of bandwidth. They'll have to allow you to have DMX control. They'll have, transport systems. There'll be eventually certain kinds of cameras or hookups for those cameras or mounts in those as we move forward. Because I think that we're right on that. Richard is. The reason I was so excited to have him come in and show this is that he's really on that outer bleeding edge where you're bleeding more than cutting. Beyond the cutting edge, you're the bleeding edge. But I think that we're going to see this kind of culminate in something where you kind of have networks of theaters that do start to follow protocols to allow them to be just make it easier.
Yeah, it is something that we're in the process of doing and discussing within both office hours, but also within our local vicinity, is how that will work, and the potential. I'll say again, the scale of our venue is 100 people we can get into the room. The scale of online is limitless.
Yeah,
the mathematics are obvious.
Yeah, and what I'm excited about is the idea that you have a network of theaters. That I think there is something really important about having a local node that is going to do the show, like what Accidental Theater does. But that could be in Belfast, and one could be in London, another one could be in Zimbabwe, India, Australia, Seattle, all those ones where you have these. But I think having someone local that can, eventually it could be a little bit more spread out. But I think there's an advantage to being able to understand what's actually happening and have someone actually be able to go over and kick the tire, kick the box if necessary. Next question.
Comes to us from Elliot Robertson in Las Vegas. Robinson, he said, how did you solve internet access challenges? Well, I think you already discussed that. It's bonded cellular, not internet.
And you said you used a little bit of the Ethernet that was there.
We didn't at the beginning, mostly just to not over rely upon their system and again to kick the tires. So for the first gigs, we mostly just did it on cellular only, and obviously the marquee I mentioned had no Ethernet connections. But we did start to go to Ethernet on a couple of locations, but we didn't give it priority because again the venues, especially the venues of the scale we're talking about, everything will be running through that Ethernet. The entire building will be running, every cache machine, every piece of equipment will be running through that one Ethernet connection, and the max that they will have going out will be 20 megs, if that. So the Ethernet essentially became like one extra SIM card. It was only putting up 4 megs. Everything else was on the other SIMs.
At bars, a lot of times we usually ask to put a QoS somewhere like right at the WAN. So hey, can we? We're doing the show, and obviously you have to have some juice to ask for that, but if you can, then we basically hand back the venue what it needs to operate, but not more than that. Then we keep it, or we have our router give them the cellular signal, and then we take the wired signal. So those are different ways that we kind of approach that problem. Next question.
Marty Adius in Maryland asks, we can build the infrastructure and the production system. Have you come up against any content licensing issues or contractual ticket limitations to overcome?
The contractual stuff is, I think, an area that's still being worked out a lot on an artist by artist basis, and especially whenever artists are less enthusiastic about online sales and less confident of what that gives them to have their content out there, maybe free or maybe more readily available than they would like. So as I kind of said at the beginning, the brief was 8 to 12. That actually went down from the original brief, which was 30. And then it came down to 12, which then ended up being 8 at the very, very end of it, because several of the artists who were on the main, who were meant to stream, decided against it. And the festival in this instance decided to only go with with what the artists were comfortable with. They didn't want to push it too much because they had less confidence in the online sales than they would in the physical sales. And one of the it's a relatively good sized festival, but it's run by a very small team. And because of COVID restrictions easing at a certain time within our country, it meant that all their bandwidth was taken up with just getting the festival done. And the online side became something that they had initially intended to do more, and then they had to deliver a little bit later than they wanted to. As much as we were in the discussions with them really early on, the spec changed 2 or 3 times within the last month of the before delivery. So a lot of that is down to contract, and a lot of it's down to what artist is happy to do what.
I think that we're also starting to see the difference between older bands and modern bands. And modern bands understand that it's their community that matters. Like that's what's going to eventually make the money that they need to make. Any kind of raw sales of content is probably not going to be a solution that's going to be viable in the not too distant future. And so you can always tell where the bands sit as far as how modern their thought process is by how open they are to streaming stuff, because they just, if they're not willing to do anything and they want to hold it back, they may be doing okay, but the ones that really are aggressive about getting out in front of a lot of people but finding ways for those people to, follow them on different things and be part of that conversation, it's a harder one because it doesn't generate revenue directly, and that's the real challenge. It's hard to see, and it takes a long time. You're farming, not hunting and gathering. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, as you're exploring this new box office ticketing concepts, that's things that I'm bludgeoning forward into as well. And were you able to go global with your ticketing system? Was there limitations there? Also, just the nuances. I know there's multiple ways of receiving income. As Alex was just saying, I'd be very curious. It'd be a much longer conversation about that whole administrative with one person thing, because at some point we're trying to figure out how to be sustained. And it sounds like you've got a lot of grants that are sustaining some of your infrastructure. That money doesn't come from nowhere.
Were you charging tickets for the online?
The festival that we worked with, they did it. They have 2 festivals that run in the year. The first one is it's called Out to Lunch, and we did that festival for them too. But they had no physical audiences, so we just set up an entire studio in one of these locations, the Black Box, and streamed directly from there. They did that entire festival free, but with donations, and they were massively surprised by how well they did, just on the basis of people's donations to free events. It's one of the reasons why they were happy to kind of go with a similar model for this festival on a smaller scale. So again, it's partly in relation to the other question, which is the artist fees. Everything is a negotiation with the artists in that the festival didn't mind what it got out of the online, so they could give 100% of the online box office to the artist if they chose to, just to be able to get the rights to stream that artist. So there's a lot of back and forth options within these kind of new kind of platforms as they emerge and mature. So I think a lot of the stuff we did was free, but with donations again. And then some of the ones that we've done for other festivals within the last couple of last year and a half, some of them are sold specifically and only access to an online audience, and some of them are festival passes that you pay a membership for the festival and then you get everything. So we've tried a couple of different scales with these things. Mostly at our we managed to get a research grant at the early pandemic to research monetization for online platforms, and looking at different ways. And one of our recommendations coming out of that to some of the festivals is that you should do a membership system all year round and do one-off sales as well, and then combine both. And that's how Accidental currently runs a lot of our own stuff, as well as we build back into main shows. As we have a membership system which essentially helps monetize over a longer period of time a lot of the equipment and a lot of the learning that we've done, but we still get a benefit from one-off ticket sales as well if people don't want to come to a monthly subscription.
And corporate sponsors are coming in as those not angel investors, angel supporters of the arts. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, that's less so for us because we come from a nation that is 1.5 million people corporate and philanthropic donations are much smaller as a nature within the UK than they are within, I think they would be a much larger option in the wider UK or wider US. The thing that we're mostly looking at is an audience driven kind of model rather than a larger kind of angel investor model. But that option is there. It's just not accessible, I think, to us. I think if you look at theater, even just without the streaming model attached to it, theater is a huge investment opportunity for angels that I don't think that people understand, because it costs nothing to create a theater show in the scheme, and the returns are huge in comparison when you have a touring show that gets successful. In comparison to TV or comparison to film, the buy-in is a fraction. It's probably 1% in comparison to the TV model, but the cachet and the benefit from it is huge, I think. And so theater, even without streaming, is an untapped economic resource, I think, for lots of places. And then with streaming, it becomes, it's huge opportunities.
And money likes to hang out with stars and actors. There's like you said, I love that cachet word. That's a point.
Yep. Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia asks, if you could do it again, what roles would you fill on your team?
Larger team. I mean, we were doing this within a very tight budget of this one specific festival. So our core team in accidental streaming wise is 3 people, and that includes myself. So I'd probably replace myself as soon as I possibly can, so that I can get a much better overview. So I would have a more, I can switch, I can do like the jack of all trades questions that we come up with all the time. I think it's really good for a person who is in a senior management role to have an overview of everything, because then, exactly as Alex says, you can talk to everyone, you can explain things, you're more knowledgeable in each area, but you don't have to, but you can step out of that way and have someone who really, really knows what they're doing get in there and perfect something. So we would replace myself probably with a more experienced TD, and replace maybe have an extra camera operator, probably one in control room as well as we had one on site. If I could, I'd probably have an extra RP150 to have one in the control and one on site as well. But that's a different kind of budget question.
Yeah, having somebody with perspective of just being able to see the whole thing is so important. It's really hard on a small budget, but it's something you always want to TD or do all the operations once so that you understand what it is, or a couple times. But being able to have somebody whose hands aren't. There's 2 things. Their hands aren't on anything, and they're also not running any errands. So that you get a PA and a producer. A lot of clients will all go immediately, oh, we don't need that. You do. So it really makes a big difference. Next question.
I think, sorry, one last thing with that. I think one of the things I didn't get to was a show presenter. Which I really wanted to test out. It would have been absolutely nightmarish for this specific delivery because COVID sets back every show time by over 30 minutes. Right. The amount of time it took to seat people. So we wanted to have an in-studio presenter and also an on-location journalist, and then we would create a much better dynamic between the physical venue and the online audience. And that's just something we didn't get to with this one, but I will try within the next. That's another benefit of the live view system, is that they have a system called Live View Smart, which it lets you do this. It lets you turn your phone into a live view camera and then stream back, and you can have on-site journalists recording stuff and then feeding it back.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next and asked, what IT skills would be the most advantageous in this network performance future?
I don't think I can probably talk to that as well as others. It's not my, I have a very limited, I have enough network knowledge that I can set something up and test it and then get someone who's better at it to fix it. So I've got, just as Victor says, just enough knowledge to be dangerous.
Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India is up next. He says, what are the drawbacks of the LiveView 800 that you notice compared to a TVU unit?
I mean, the single SDI that rules them all is a scary point. That the entire unit, the cost of this unit to buy is £20,000 if you bought it outright, and that one damaged SDI cable, of which you have to. It's not like a patch panel. I mean, you could probably travel with a patch panel, I suppose. On the mention of that, but you have to plug into it on a daily basis in multiple environments all the time. And having one SDI that means that the entire unit could die is scary. So that's one of my drawbacks. But now I've thought about it, actually, I might just travel with a patch panel from now on.
That's our big reason for never plugging anything directly into our hardware. We always have patch panels, so if someone steps on something or trips over something, they just rip out a piece of the patch panel and it's because we have a router that's a 40 by 39. So
the 800 is designed as a backpack, which is, I think, a bit of a drawback in and of itself. It's still sort of designed as a single cam delivery mechanism. It's one of the reasons why it got knocked over by an audience member, is that there's no easy way to mount it and contain it within a rack. So a rack version of it might be an interesting idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has the last one in the regular queue this morning, and he says, in the theater world, many licensing houses only license specific plays for remote or stream performance. Do you think that the licensing agencies will open up to network performances as they become more prevalent?
It's a big discussion early pandemic that's sort of coalesced a little bit more now over the last 6 months, especially around it's less to do with the license to the rights of a play, because it's more to do with the actors' fees and the extra sales of an event as it goes on and keeps on earning money over time. Equity is in the UK has put in certain rules that for both the rights of the performance rights, but also the actors' pay, that are slightly, in my initial opinion, for small broadcasts like ours, quite difficult to match. And in my experience, I mean, I do a lot more new content than I do pre-existing. As my career as a theater director, I've mostly done new writing plays. So you are having a relationship with that writer rather than buying in a specific rights for a play. But streaming rights have been part of theatrical kind of licensing for a while, and now that's sort of changing and molding and kind of changing ever so slightly with the larger platform of streaming as it's kind of become bigger, and we'll have to see how it kind of pans out a little bit over the next kind of 6 months again, as we've had an explosion of online streaming that's likely to contract quite quickly and then build back out more slowly over time. And so we kind of have to see how these things go over the next wee while to see what rights and what writers and actors are fairly due, but also how we can keep that flexible for emerging markets.
Richard, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the preparation and the great explanation of what you guys are working on. It's really exciting. And we're working about every other week now. I think we're shifting to an every other week kind of thing with the Belfast method. So on Saturdays you can hang out with Richard online, actually cut a show at the theater, be part of comms, just watch the whole thing unfold. And so I think we're going to start switching back and forth for a little while between Todd's little home studio, and that's what's this weekend, and then back to the accidental theater the week after that. So we're going to have a lot of fun, kind of continuing to experiment with this. So thank you so much for
at some point, hopefully I'll have one that will set up like a stream from a different building with the 800 system as the way to stream it, or from the cliffs around the city. Something mad. You'll just be surprised that one day we'll have a really weird stream.
I love the idea of a band out in the field, on the cliffs, with the live view and us cutting the show remotely. That would be super cool. Yeah. All right. Let's
Speaking of Alex, sorry to interrupt. In line with this great presentation, one of Jeff, along with doing the tennis, he did a ultra marathon in Lake Tahoe, where he had tons of these live views in the mountains. And I was actually going to be on the gig, but got moved to tennis. But it would be great to get him on to talk about the whole.
I'm going back and forth. I'm just trying to figure out his time. So I gave him some schedules, and it hasn't lined up yet. So we're definitely going to get Jeff on to talk more about what he's working on. All right. Thanks again, Richard. Thank you to our producers for the great questions, keeping the whole thing rolling. And thanks to our panelists. Yet another good conversation, 500 and whatever into it. It's amazing.
5.7, I think. 5.57.
5.57. It's amazing. Anyway, so really, really great work. Stuart, can we post John Barker's link. He's starting right now, I think, back into Meccano, just to make sure it's at the top of the list for everybody. I think that everyone should, or a lot of people should jump over. You can do the Mystery Science Theater version in after hours, but I think it's going to be worth it. I know I'm going to try to jump over there. Anyway, so hopefully we'll put that back into
the
Meccano.
link about 30 seconds ago.
Okay, perfect.
And it starts in 60 minutes.
Oh, 60 minutes. It's still another hour. I thought it was right when we finished here.
Yeah, I just refreshed the page and it's saying 60 minutes.
Okay, so you have an hour, but we'll probably be hanging out and watching it and talking about it in after hours. All right. See you, everybody.